Hi, I'm Nicola Graham, and welcome to Chewing Over High Performance. In this episode, I'll be exploring the topics of leadership and learning in high performance with Dan Howells, an elite performance coach, mentor, and consultant. But first, thanks to our sponsor, Nucal. Nucal is a comprehensive practice management system for allied health practices and clinics, ranging from small to large, as well as multi-site. Nucal is designed to deliver both clinical and management perspectives, so practitioners, practice managers, and business owners can achieve their desired outcomes. Nucal understands the importance of performance and therefore looks to deliver these results for you. Nucal would like to offer the first 100 listeners an exclusive 25% discount on their data conversion and migration for 2024. Just visit nucal.com/promotions/MSK24 to start a free trial with the coupon code MSK24, and you'll receive 25% off your first data conversion and migration. Thank you, Nucal, for your support for the MSK industry. I'm Nicola Graham, and this is Chewing Over High Performance. In this latest episode, I am joined by Dan Howells, a high-performance coach, mentor, and lecturer. Dan's career started with the English Institute of Sport as a strength and conditioning coach, and from there he spent time with Wasps Premier League, England Rugby, and Houston Astros in Major League Baseball. More recently, his experience has expanded from elite sporting environments to include coaching emerging practitioners, lecturing in universities, and consultant work for commercial organisations. Sometimes people come across your radar who take what I view a very comprehensive approach. And whilst Dan can expertly coach and mentor the technical sides of strength and conditioning, the aspect that I want to focus on today and that I believe allows people to excel and perform to their potential is around leadership and learning, the non-technical skills. So Dan, what does leadership in high performance look like to you?
Hi, Nicola. Thanks for having me. Great question to start. I think that in thinking about this question, it starts with leading by example. I think about all the high performance environments I've set foot in. We've had some that are quite anti-performance as well, and they've often been when people intend to lead well, and their behaviors don't lead by example, or they don't align to the values or behaviors that they're talking about. Whereas in the environments that I would see as high performance orientated, where you want to work for each other and work towards a common goal, there's clarity on what you're working towards, and that the individual who is leading with a high performance approach is doing so with accountability, vulnerability in what they do, and you feel as much of the part of the team with them as opposed to for them as such.
Yeah, that makes sense. But some of those aspects that you're kind of referring to there, you could generalize those across, I suppose, different industries. They're not sport specific to a high degree because they're the human elements that make a team work well together. Have you noticed that in other environments, not just from the sporting world?
Yeah, I think that when I look at what is great leadership, it can be in any environment. I've seen young emerging practitioners show great leadership of after school clubs with youth populations, and I talk about them being both, two distinct qualities of inspiration, somebody you want to follow, but also accountability, that somebody you want to be accountable towards, and that you feel that they're equally accountable to somebody else, and that there's this element of teamship in what you're doing. But that inspiration and accountability can be observed in that after school club, like I say, with a good coach, inspiring those youth populations or individuals that they're working on, just in terms of orchestrating a fun games environment. But they're setting some accountability and standards that those individuals can learn from, as well as deliver an outcome in a training session. So yes, and then you're looking at situations like my higher education lecturing situations. There is hierarchy, and hierarchy without leadership can often lead to a fragmented approach. And so I do see a lot of systems within the higher education focus going off in different directions, because it's like, well, what are we working towards here? What are our systems? What are our processes? and you're inspired in some areas within that system and lacking in others. So it's hugely transferable for sure. And I see it all over with the people I work with and the situations I've been lucky enough to be a part of.
So there's a couple of aspects there to kind of pull apart. It's that working with like a youth team, let's use that as an example that is potentially, doesn't have to be the case, but a more inexperienced practitioner. So then leadership doesn't become an aspect solely related to time within your career or years under the belt from that perspective at all.
No, I think obviously the more years in service and the more experience you have, the more, I guess, leadership becomes associated with higher pressure situations, higher risk and reward from good and bad leadership situations. And I guess when you've got revenue and business, that it becomes more pressure orientated as well, and so on. And so there'll be suitability of individuals to the leadership requirements of an environment. And I guess that brings us to a point that leadership is going to be diverse, different types of leadership that are going to be required in different environments. And I think that comes down to the problems that need to be solved. I think it's really clear or important to be clear about what those are. But if we look at leadership as a construct, it's often that people get promoted into leadership positions based on potential for that role or need,
Yeah.
as opposed to competency. And there's a lot of learning on the job. And so, yeah, leadership should be happening at every opportunity along somebody's career path. And I certainly looked for it. I looked for ways to be a leader, even if it was just I'm a coach by trade. So even if it was just me coaching my athletes, could I be seen as a leader for that 20-minute warm up? And what could I learn about leadership in that domain or that medium that I was faced with?
I think that really interesting point about being promoted based on potential. I've actually read something about that recently, that there seems to be a real gender difference around that as well, in that men are generally promoted on potential, where women are promoted on they have to actually have proved that they've done
Yeah,
it
proven
beforehand.
competency. Yeah.
And obviously, as we know, kind of leadership and senior management, regardless of actually sport or anywhere else, sport, I would say, is probably really highly dominated by males as well, but also senior leadership across business. So that may occur, but it may actually occur actually related to gender differences in leadership positions rather than solely it's kind of going to happen because men will put themselves forward for those roles as well.
Yeah, I think there's a hugely dynamic consideration here, and there'll be opinions and perspectives and fact and feel. There's loads of different constructs to this, and yeah, in sport it is male dominated in the environments I've worked within. What do I think about all those things? I think that if we think about the males and females I've coached, because I can only speak from the male perspective, but I have tried to step into understanding how I lead a group of females, for example, to help me understand that dynamic. And one thing I felt across my career of sport with male athletes was there was almost a lack of curiosity from males. If I had a plan and I said do X, Y, and Z, they generally follow. And if they were to challenge me, it was to test me, right? But with the female population, it was much more of a approach of curiosity and asking, well, why are we doing that? Not challenging me to be difficult, but challenging me to make sure that I had their best interests at heart with the decisions that I was making. And that in itself is an interesting dynamic, and we should pay respect to. And I think that maybe something around that, influences men's promotion into roles, because maybe they're just taking uncalculated risks that just seem to put them in good positions. Whereas, the female populations and the practitioners I've worked with are a little bit maybe deeper thinkers or more thoughtful, or need more time to ruminate over decisions or actions and behaviors. And that's absolutely fine. So something as complex as that could be a manifestation of why we see those gender differences. We do have a vicious cycle then of males promoting males, I imagine, as well.
Yeah.
and cutting from the same cloth, or we all get on with people that we see ourselves in them, and that's difficult as well. And yeah, my background on personality and behavior and mindset, and that part it plays in leadership and people being able to flex and adapt their styles. And actually, I think some of the going back to the best leaders I've been lucky enough to work for, they haven't had one style, and they've had an ability to adapt and flex. Yeah.
And I think there's a couple of points around that. It's definitely that, and what you're kind of hinting, well, not even hinting towards, is that degree of self-awareness and that ability to explore that as early stage as you're learning your technical skills, because you're then creating that ability to know, are you the right leader for that right problem? And if not, who should you have around you? And if you're not, what can you do to grow and develop that? And I suppose that leads on to a lot of your work at the moment is associated with learning and supporting and developing other people. How do you bring in those non-technical skills to what majority, and we know this, hence why it was a battle for even me to get this podcast series off the ground, is because everyone wants to know the clinical skills, everyone wants to know the technical skills. And how do you approach those conversations with people?
Yeah, I think if we look at our domains of work, whether that's a profession or industry of clinical setting or coaching setting, performance setting, administration, but whatever it is, it's a non-negotiable that you have to have the prerequisite skills to deliver that service, right? That's absolutely not argued or debated. The problem for me is that people assume that the more clinical skills, the better they are. More is more. And that's not the case in what I've seen, whether this is in leadership or just people accelerating through the trajectory of their career at a fast rate. It doesn't come down to what you know. It comes down to how you apply what you know to the context in front of you. And I see so many bright individuals, and we know there's some fantastic people in the physio industry with deep thinking minds, but their ability to simplify their language and terminology to those around them doesn't lead very well. And so it becomes a dictatorship, or it becomes all dictatorial in nature, and that's a tough place for people to follow a leader. Whereas we've seen people maybe with less experience and less niche or specialty or expertise in a certain area, but with a broader set of skills and an understanding and appreciation of the knowledge, but not to a depth of somebody else. But they can be more relatable. They can make it relatable for the people around them, or the other clinicians around them, or the clients that they're working with, because they can flex and adapt that insight, knowledge, information, skill to the context in front of them. And I saw a social media post today about a physio doing a muscle testing of an athlete, of a client, and looking at the results, go, oh, that's not very good, and they're right. That result is not very good. It's very low versus expectation. But how you deliver that information is the be all and end all to the next step with that patient in terms of getting them buy-in and getting them adhering to a program consistently, and making it relatable to their world and their goal, as opposed to where they sit across norms, and that it was a bit of a meme situation, but it was a funny bit of social media that I thought it's 100% right.
Oh, it's completely right. And we talk about this a lot in that I think if we do a quick comparison around kind of strength and conditioning and sports science versus physio, and the approach to data over the years, physios have potentially believed that they've been objective, but they really haven't. They've been hugely subjective. And it's only with kind of I suppose the emergence of technology into clinical settings, or have taken an interest in the health and medical world, that we've had to kind of question really that practice. So there has been a lot of reliance, I suppose, on communication or subjective, and we're managing expectations quite subjectively. And I also think this is why potentially people have struggled to also lean into these non-technical skills, because it is highly subjective and it is based on a lot of perceptions and expectations. So how do you start to then objectify that in some way? How do you encourage people to, is it around reflection? Is it feedback? Is it self-awareness. What do you encourage people to start to look at that more objectively, and to also get out of your head and
Yeah.
not think about it just within your own silo?
Yeah, I think there's a few things I think we can talk about here, and I don't think they happen in any particular order. But if I look back at when I was in my career, it was making sure you've got a good network around you to start with, of people that you can sense check things with, right? Now, if you're a sole practitioner, self-employed, in a room with a client, that network of people to sense check things with is quite limited. It's the client, really. So feedback is really important, and probably something that we as practitioners don't do enough of, whether that's in the clinical coaching space, is get feedback from our athletes or clients. And one environment was just truly high performance for me was getting feedback from all the athletes we worked in about my quality of service. It was completely anonymized, and it gave me a great, but it was how that feedback was framed. It was about, well, what can Dan do better to improve the performance of this team? What does Dan do that potentially limits it and should think about changing? You know, the words and in feedback and the structure of it has to be really systematic to get the best out of it, rather than an old school, like, you know,
How did you
five
do?
5 stars out of 10 and no context. So context is
Yeah.
really key. So if you can create, if you can recognize the system and support system around you that you can glean and obtain objectively subjective information from, which is feedback, that's really, really important. But firstly, there's got to be an awareness of, or a desire and a want and a trait internally to want to be better. Because we all know the people that are always going to do what they've done and have no desire to be any better, and they're just going to do what they do, and that's fine, but arguably quite limiting as well. um the other thing that I think is really important is to understand self. You talked about self-awareness, and self-awareness is going to be improved by a number of things. Again, feedback, hearing things that you don't want to hear about yourself, um, and having the emotional intelligence to not dwell on that and recognize it as just an insight. Much like we collect data on our athletes or our clients, that's just an insight. What we do with that insight determines how I improve that client, or how that insight helps me improve as a practitioner. It's the same. Data is just an insight, and it's just the same process. What are we going to do with it to help improve it? So it has to be a desire to grow. But the objectivity side of things is really important. And so you and I have spoken about this, and I've done this with a number of practitioners, where we go through like a behavioral preference or mindset preference tool, a self-evaluation tool, to understand, how do we preference decisions? Are we more risk averse or more opportunistic in nature? How do we see the same decision? You and I might be faced with the same critical decision in a business, and I may look at it with absolute risk, and you may look at it with absolute opportunity. But it's the same situation. How can we have different perspectives? Well, our past experiences, our trials and tribulations, our successes, all will impact that. And then we'll have our behavioral preferences as well. So you might be a very energetic individual, and I may be very like logical and silent and take my time with things. Yet in the gym or in a workspace, we may be faced with the same type of client. How are we going to approach that? Okay, we'll do it in very different ways. Now, one of those ways might be really suitable for a client, and one of those ways may be quite debilitating or limiting for a client. So firstly, understanding where you sit as a preferential behavior and a preferential decision-making person is really important, because only then can you understand, okay, if that's what I preference towards, and this is where I have difficulty moving towards in terms of my behavior or my decisions, I can start to be aware in situations of how I may need to flex. And I'll give you an example. My preferential style is to be quite direct and factual. And the least preference I have is towards empathy. I struggle with that emotional side of things and feelings and chit chat, right, with people. So in a client space or an athlete sense, that, talking about the social side of things and how they are and how they're feeling, it's not something that's relatable to me. It's not something that I naturally preference. So I consciously have to spend time thinking about the language I use, asking them how they are, rather than getting straight into a coaching session. And that will be, in certain contexts, very, very useful. In other contexts, I can just be a little bit more like myself. But if I'm always like myself, at some point or another, that's going to break down the effectiveness of an outcome or situation. So that type of tool is really paramount. I think with all the young practitioners I work with, I encourage them to go in through that. And if they don't want to do that, the next step is coaching and reflection and working with a mentor to make sense of any situation and reflect on things that have gone well and things that have not gone well. And we do that with our students in higher education at the minute quite a lot, because there's such a big focus on professional vocational readiness on leaving higher education. So reflective practice is another one.
I think the bit that I pick out from a lot of that is experiences. Like you have to expose yourself to a wide variety of experiences. And for all kind of, you can moan about your parents to degrees, but my dad had me on building sites at like 11 years old and
Yeah.
in greasy spoon calves, because that's he ran a construction business. And so when we as a physio clinic are then have a commercial contract with, for example, Oxford City Council, and we're looking after their CEO down to one of their refuse collectors, like the ability to kind of communicate on different levels. But in a world that is digital and social media driven and is behind a phone or behind a computer screen, that's hard, and people struggle with that.
Yeah, I'd say that, people of our era will be more akin to those experiences you've talked about, whereas a younger practitioner, 5, 10 years behind, coming into, I guess, reality of life and independence at the time of social media booming, um, are potentially being limited by their experience. And we see it in the student. I'll relate to the higher education side again, because there's this expectation that if I go down this route, I'll get this outcome. But that's not the way. It's just one tiny bit of making yourself a better practitioner or person, and you have to go and step outside your biases and see things from different perspectives. And you talk about experiences there. It's not just experiences, because you can go and be on that building site or be in that greasy spoon, and you can be present. But if you're not pressing pause and engaging and reflecting and rewinding on that experience, that's the missed opportunity.
That's
And
the bit that though people find the hardest, isn't it?
yeah,
Because
because
that's the
people,
personal part.
it's the personal part, but it also takes conscious effort and a desire to want to be better. I mean, how many of us have ignored something and dismissed it because we don't want to confront it? I mean, it happens. Everybody will have experienced that, where it's just, I'll be dismissive of it, and it never happened, right? But it's the desire to pause, sit, and reflect back in order to improve tomorrow that's really important. But people just go, right, that's today done. And this happens in professional sport quite a lot. What's our next job? What's the next job? What's the next job? And then that becomes a cyclical process, and then that becomes just the same thing done, and we become hamsters in that wheel, reiterating the same actions, and that doesn't change anything. So we can do that, and at some point those things will be really, really highly effective. But from my point of view, again, in all the leadership environments I've been in, in all the high performance and positive leadership environments I've been in, there has been a safe psychological safety in it, that we can make mistakes, because I will say there's a massive bandwidth where you can make mistakes that are not negligent, and there's a very small edge to it where you do slip into negligence. And I think we all know what those extremes are. Well, we should be making mistakes that we can learn from, soft mistakes as I call them.
Yeah.
But there's a fear factor around the workplace that we can't make those mistakes, or if we do make it, I'm not talking about it, because that makes me a lesser practitioner. Whereas I'm always been, okay, this happened to me today, what do you think of that? Because my perspective of that mistake might just be like, no, that's normal, that happens all the time. And as you know, I've got a podcast that's out, and it's called the Performance Strategies and Stumbles podcast. Week 1 is about a specific strategy, and week 2 is about all the mistakes that practitioner has made. And even just this morning, editing an episode for a young practitioner who recognized on reflection that he called it verbal diarrhea, right? He just had this constant case of verbal diarrhea in his coaching that undid all the good in his coaching cues by talking too much. And he didn't realize until he had a conversation with someone about it. And they were like, yeah, I had the same problem. This is how I help myself.
Yeah.
So we can all help each other by just talking about it, to be honest.
So if you bring that back to kind of leadership from the perspective of that conscious,
Mm.
if we talk about that people can sometimes be put in these roles, there isn't that point where they consciously always decide to be leaders, but they're put in management positions or senior positions that require a degree of leadership, yet
Mm.
they're set up to fail.
Yeah, yeah, they're set up to fail generally because they're just like, here, we've got a gap, jump into this, you've got potential, go. And there's not a structured um, graduation, I guess, into that role, you know, and people are left to their own devices, and that's a dangerous place to operate. Then there's the misperception of what leadership is by the person stepping in. And they think that because I'm stepping into management now, I need to tell people, sorry, leadership, I need to tell people what to do, which is actually management. There's a big difference. And I talk to, again, it's the same thing about flexing your style to the context in front of you. So if I'm trying to inspire individuals, that doesn't need management. That needs me just behaving and acting in a way that demonstrates certain things done in certain ways and people would follow by example. Or I might, in their appraisals, talk about how some of the work that they've been doing could be better and how it could lead them to a better outcome in their career based on their goals, and what do they need from me to help them. That's a very leadership style. Whereas at the other end of the continuum is you need to be doing X, Y, and Z by this date and this time, or you need to be doing it in this process. And that's a dictatorial, robotic approach. But that is needed sometimes. Some cultures need management. Cultures of change sometimes need management, sometimes need inspiration. And so people stepping into those roles are often failing because they don't know what problems they're trying to solve.
I think
And actually stepping back and observing it.
the aspect around agility, I think, is really interesting because my experience is that people that are rigid is because they don't feel that they can be vulnerable,
Yeah.
and they're too attached to actually what that title of even that role is. As
Mm.
so when you start then questioning their kind of physio or technical skills, they take that so personally, and it's like, this isn't about you as a person. This is so that ability to differentiate yourself within that professional environment. And I suppose the aspect, and I relate it from a physio being my background, is it's a highly vocational career. You go in to help people, and if you're not helping them, it's like it's like you're not achieving what you aim to do, and therefore that's a direct reflection on you as a person. Having now in your from your work, you're now crossing over from kind of, it's not just strength and conditioning coaches, it's physios, it's physical therapy. You're going cross boundaries from the point of view of internationally, but also professional boundaries. What are you finding as the kind of key transferable skills that really highlight to you in a positive way how someone would respond in a high performance environment?
Yeah, is comfort and vulnerability. Is this innate desire to be better and recognizing that I have to fail together. That's and so I run a number of different opportunities for practitioners, from monthly free opportunities to the podcast to investable opportunities from group mentorships and investable like bespoke executive coaching. And if we take the group mentorship and the sort of bespoke executive coaching, people sometimes join a group mentorship through fear of missing out, or because they think that step is required to take them to the next level. There's one thing to enroll in something with an intention of being a part of it. It's another thing to have all the actions and behaviors that embed yourself within a culture of learning and development and growth, where you're going to be questioned and challenged constructively, and you're going to have to sit and listen and discuss things from different perspectives. And what I observe is there are certain individuals that will do the easy thing, the transactional thing. I will commit to this with an investment here and then do nothing beyond that in terms of engagement. And for me, that's people who aren't comfortable with being challenged or talking about mistakes or being vulnerable. But the people that I see excel are ever present, asking questions, asking for help, asking for support. And not because they are desperate or in need of it. It's because I recognize that somebody else is 3 or 4 years ahead of me in their career and can help me solve this problem
Yeah.
rather than me trying to do it alone, because I recognize that my way might not be the right way.
Yeah.
And that's what I see, irrespective of profession, irrespective of culture, is that recognition that I want to be better, and that is going to take recognition of mistakes, and I'm comfortable with that. People think vulnerable is a weak word, but if you're vulnerable and you're accepting that you're vulnerable, you're in control of it. When do I want to be vulnerable? When do I not want to be vulnerable? That's again, it's this conscious decision to be part of growing and developing in a certain way. If somebody is making me vulnerable, that's different.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm putting myself in a position of vulnerability, I think that's an acceptable and really exciting place to grow.
And if we now have a kind of a brief chat into the commercial world, which is my love and passion, how are you seeing? So you've got that experience from those kind of high performance sporting environments. You've got aspects that you can bring into then the emerging and the higher education. When you go into commercial, what did that start to open your eyes to? Um, because there is a difference when
Hmm.
we start to talk about money,
Yeah.
really. It's a different driver. It changes the dynamics. It
Hmm.
puts it puts performance and pressure in a kind of a different light and things.
Yeah.
Has that been a learning curve for you, or are there things that you've brought to those environments that
Yeah.
have opened other people's eyes on both sides?
Yeah, I think there's numerous different situations. If we take like clinics and businesses, things that are looking to profit and make money and create turnover, um, people who are or leaders, I guess, or situations that are set up that is money orientated is a difficult place for people to operate in. Money is outcome orientated, and nobody wants to be told that we need to improve our X income in the next quarter by X%, because it's so outcome driven. Inspire me and tell me how I can do that, or how I can be part of a process for growth. But you don't need to tell me about the numbers,
Yeah, yeah.
because suddenly it just demotivates people, especially when people who work within a business aren't the owners of a business. It's two very different things. Um,
But
I've
just
seen some,
challenging you on that slightly, is that
yeah,
where sport has gone wrong to some degree? Like we've seen clubs go under financial difficulties. Has there not been a focus enough on actually everyone's got to get paid? There's got to be.
yeah, yeah, maybe. I guess in those situations, we're talking about the rugby clubs, etc. I think that needs to be transparency. And I think that was lacking in those situations,
Yeah.
because that's like, hold on, I didn't think we had an issue. It's okay to say, look, we've had a net loss over the last 6 months. And to turn this business around, we need to be all working together for the safety of our own jobs. I think that's an honest, transparent place to be. So I think you need, I think in times of distress and crisis, transparency is critical. In
Yeah.
times of euphoria and when we're booming, probably being humble is important. I think those
Yeah.
are the two comparisons there. And that was where I was going to go on this next comparison, is this humbleness of people in the commercial space who maybe are business owners, or they're responsible for revenue or profit, and trying to inspire with numbers. It's not inspiring. It's inspiring for you because we all know you make a profit or a bonus, but for everyone else, it's not as inspiring. And actually, culture probably breeds more inspiration there, and reward and recognition. Um, so I think that's another key value in leadership, is that feeling very much valued about what your role is and what you bring to a business or situation is really, really important, and consistency across a group. And I've seen that. I've seen culture be not culture. I've seen situations of friction because there's lack of consistency in how people are managed, and people will test people naturally. We'll all do. It's natural instinct to take the path of least resistance generally.
Yeah.
And so people will challenge that. What can I get away with? Yeah, I've been there myself. And when you see you've got that freedom, or then you'll take advantage of it. But then somebody else is potentially, being influenced in a negative way by observing that. So that's why this sort of accountability, leading by example from leadership, and inspiration are all really, really key for me.
And I think that aspect also around agility comes in again there, or flexibility, from the point of view of that actually there are some people who are motivated by money from their bonus or point of view, but they're probably not going to work in healthcare, if I'm honest, kind of thing. But that's fine. But as a leader, it's important to know what is motivating your team, and being able to flex that, which is a challenge when you also need a degree of consistency across there as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, like that's, as a business owner, how much do people think about how they coach their staff?
Mm.
Okay, so if I need to create behavior change, there, if we take things like self-determination theory, right, which needs relatedness, autonomy, and competence, right? So if there's a relatedness across the business model, which is you bring in you bring in clients and make more money for the business, that makes more money for yourself, right? That's some relatedness in that. Competence, do you have the competent skills to deliver the services we need? Well, if you're limited by your inability to do acupuncture or imaging or whatever, and that's a skill gap for you, and I'm asking you to bring in more revenue, well, you're already limited by that. So as a leader, I'm asking you to do something where you're already de-skilled, you compared to the next person. Well, I've got to afford you the opportunity as a leader to potentially say, well, let me subsidize that for you so we can bring you up to speed and give you an opportunity to bring in more revenue for the business. Well, not only does that create motivation and inspire the individual, there's reciprocity in that situation as well, and there's also a bit of potential loyalty to that. And then there's autonomy. Well, that's where people go a little bit wrong. People are really motivated by autonomy. So if you guys say, look, I need you to bring in a minimum of this amount a month, you have the freedom to do it how you wish. Structure it 20-minute clinic settings, or 60-minute sessions, or you can upsell certain services, etc. But these are the barriers upon which, or the constraints to work in. So I don't know if we go into those levels of detail when we think about human motivation. And that's just me thinking off the top of my head about how it could be scalable into a profession I'm not averse to. I don't know how the system would run.
I think it's bringing it right back. This becomes also the fact that potentially people are put in positions that they're a physio, let's say, for example, and then suddenly they're a business owner, and that's not what they were trained to. It's not. So coming kind of full circle back around being put in positions that potentially you're not ready for, or not prepared for, or you haven't chosen to. It's just the fact that there's been an organic growth in that commercial setting, and suddenly you've now got a team, and suddenly you're now a leader. So that coming back to right from the beginning, I suppose, that self-awareness of, okay, suddenly I'm now in a different context, in a different environment. How am I going to approach that?
Yeah, I was going to say that there's, just because you own a business doesn't mean you need to be the leader.
No, not
And
at all.
so that's probably where people go wrong, is like, okay, I've developed a business. Like, actually, what if you put yourself as a business owner on the same level as your fellow physios, and you hired a practice manager who you were all accountable to? What does that say for inspiration for the people alongside you, that actually this is really cool that this guy's recognized that for the best thing in his business, it's to not be the person at the top. It's the person who can make some decisions on the board, but there's other decisions he's relieved of him, or she's relieved of themselves. And that's sometimes probably a real problem that people need to face. I think it all does come down to what are the problems we're trying to solve. I will say that the further we go up the chain in performance, whatever that performance is, whether it's like from junior to senior practitioner, senior to technical lead to department management to owner, CEO, whatever, the more isolated we become, and the more skills we need in areas that we're not equipped for. And I think then the importance of outsourcing support, especially outside of your environment, becomes really important. And so if I look at like my business that's grown, and it wasn't something I was trying to ever do, but when I recognized there was a need for it, I was really motivated to fill that gap, is this mentorship of practitioners who, the further up the chain they go, the less support they have. And they sense check a lot of their ideas with me, and I can constructively challenge them on that. I can give them different perspectives, ways to think about things, and they can go away with more clarity and actually more motivation to solve the problem because they've tackled it with someone. And that's not going home to talk to your partner about it, unfortunately, because there's biases there. An impartial mind and perspective is really, really important, I think.
I think that's a really great place to kind of finish that conversation, Dan, from the point of view of that actually, regardless of what level you're at, having that support, asking questions, asking for advice, and always having that willingness to learn doesn't stop regardless of where you are.
100%. I think it's the defining factor for a lot of individuals is these traits that they're looking to grow, and really that they never have the answers, but they have the motivation and desire to find them, and that they know that they generally lie within other people and other perspectives. And yeah, I'd agree.
Definitely. Thank you so much for your time. Really great conversation, thought-provoking on lots of different levels.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Bye. Well, that's the end of the third episode of Cheering Over High Performance. It's really insightful for me to have that conversation with Dan, an experienced practitioner and mentor, to discuss aspects around leadership and learning. We've explored those topics around self-awareness and having that curiosity to want to learn and develop throughout your career, and what that means as a leader to be inspirational and agile within your approach. I hope you enjoyed that episode, and next time I'll be joined by Angela Schott, an experienced physiotherapist, head of clinical services, and a leader herself. In that episode, we're going to dissect around who the customer is in an MSK business model. I think quite a lot of the time this is also a misunderstood topic. We've also got a lot of biases and beliefs about what that looks like, and therefore dissecting it and really trying to understand and evaluate it is definitely worth the time. I hope you look forward to that conversation.